It is finally that time. Once again, it is time to take a look at all the must-have cards for Set 2, Reign of Bahamut. No Bahamut-related intros this time. We're going to just jump into it and tell you all of the different cards that are in Set 2 that you probably should pick up somewhere along the line. Some of these cards we're going to talk about today, of course, are really good in the present format, so if you're going to some of the upcoming regionals, then you definitely want to have them right now. And then some of these cards will be ones that are just going to age really well. You're going to still be using them for many sets in the future, so you definitely want to pick them up as early as possible. We're going to start off with the neutrals, and of course the one that is going to be representing the neutrals for us in this section is going to be Olivia, actually. So Olivia is an amazing card because this card is a 5 cost that basically lets you do 2 of 4 things, which is quite a lot of choice. And of course, you know, when you have effects like this where you get to choose one of many things to do, it kind of definitely contributes a lot to your skill expression and to which extent, you know, you're able to really solve the game state at the time. And so for the fact that she can substitute as either giving you EP, giving you draws, giving you, defense back to your leader, or letting your opponent lose cards, there's quite a lot that goes on in this card. Oftentimes you'll be healing yourself, drawing cards, maybe making your opponent ditch cards when their hand is low, especially if they play an aggro deck. So there's a lot of different applications to her, and I can tell you right now that I still had Olivia in some of my decks in set 5, which was the first year anniversary set in the Japanese format. So even a year later, this card was still really good, and because she's neutral, you get a lot of mileage out of her in a lot of different classes. So in terms of worth of picking up, this is definitely one of those cards. So I would say 2 or 3, but definitely 3 is recommended because the decks that do want to play her oftentimes do put in 3, and whenever you look at deck lists in the future of like topping lists from regionals and you want to try a list out, you see the 3 Olivias and you'll feel pretty relieved knowing that you do have all 3 and you can just put them into your deck at any time. So I really recommend Olivia. She's kind of like the forefront of recommendations this time around. The other legendary, Bahamut, is of course going to be a pretty important have for certain classes, especially Dragon. If you play Ramp Dragon, like Bahamut is pretty good fit in there. You get to have an easy answer to your opponent's boards / amulets that they may have as well, especially with Leonidas running around. And on top of that, it's a huge stat stick, right? So if you're playing Ramp, it's pretty good. So I think that if specifically you are a Ramp player or maybe Control player, then Bahamut at like 2 or 3 of the pre-evolution one and then 1 copy of the post-evolve one is pretty good. But again, mostly emphasis not so much on just having it as a neutral card like Olivia, but more so having it for Dragon specifically. For the golds, I've stressed this card a lot in the previous video too, but Surefire Bullet is incredible. Surefire Bullet is still played to this day in the post-set 6 format in Japan, so this card is going to age very well because it's kind of like 2 cost unconditional damage, right? It's like 3 damage and then if they're evolved, it's 4. So being able to take out your opponent's evolve followers for a 2 cost spell is really, really good because the trade-off you get is really nice. Spell chain decks really like this card as well, so especially if you're playing spell chain, it's a super must-have, but otherwise a lot of other decks are going to be finding space for this too, so 3 copies easily. Honestly, I'm pretty sure I own about 12 copies of this card because I just slotted into so many different decks, and I was like, well, if I can pick it up now easily, I might as well, right? So I really do recommend Surefire Bullet. At least 3 copies, you're going to be finding it in a lot of your decks too. Reina's an interesting one though. She's also neutral gold where you get to, she's a 4/4/5 ward that evolves for 1, and on evolve she recovers play points equaling to how many face-up cards in your evolve deck there are and then turns them face down. So what's really cool about this is that of course you get to reuse some of your evolve cards, right? So you can choose to run a more greedy evolve deck lineup where you only run like 1-ofs of cards that you might want to evolve into multiple times, and then rely on Reina a little bit to kind of allow you to have that kind of toolboxiness in your evolve deck while at the same time recovering play points, right? So the more into the late game you go, right? She's a 5 cost 5/6 with ward, but if you flip 5 things face down with her, well then she's a 0 cost 5/6 with ward. So her payoff kind of only gets better with time. You really want to play her just for like the 4 cost 4/5 ward body because that's pretty expensive, I would say. But with the evolve combined, she's really good. So I would say pick up like 2 or 3 of the normal one, 1 or 2 of the evolve one. That's usually like the ratios you want to be playing her at. And she can kind of slot into different decks, but she's a lot more like specific to your strategy. So you either kind of choose to build your deck with Reina in mind or without it. So do keep that in mind. The last neutral I want to pick up on is Unica. Unica is a silver, so she is a 2 cost 2/2 that says when when she strikes. So when she attacks anything, you restore 2 defense to your leader, and she keeps that effect on evolve, and she evolves for 1 cost. So, you know, having like a 2/2 that just like heals you a little bit, sustains you, is pretty good in some of those control decks. And so because these you pick up, I'd say like 3 of the normal one, 2 of the evolve one, I think should be pretty fine because it is a silver. Getting into Forest Craft, of course, goes without saying, Crystalia Tia is a really important card that we've already featured in a previous video as well. Being a 2-cost 1/1 that essentially allows you to also summon a 4/4 token is really good. But on top of that, on evolve, she buffs that token and gives it extra stats and rush as well. So you get a lot out of the 2 costs that you pay for her, or 3 costs with the evolve combined. Like 3 costs for 7/7 in stats is nothing to scoff at, and this is a very big part of patching up that mid game that Force sometimes had troubles dealing with. So Tia is like 3 of the regular, 2 of the evolve, I would say. Really important card for Force, so I would definitely pick it up. For the golds, the one card I do want to kind of mention as like a maybe is Elf Girl Liza. So she says as long as she's on the field, your followers don't take damage from enemy abilities. So it only applies to your followers, so it's not to your leader itself. So I was kind of talking to some Force mains as well, and they were saying this is a card that's like you're pretty happy to have just in case wherever in a format where your board is just getting constantly pinged and pinged and pinged, and you need some kind of way to protect it. So I would say that it's not a high priority, but if you can pick up 3 Lizas, it would be good just to have. But a card that you definitely can't go without is Crystalia Lily. Talked about her in the past too, but 2 cost 1/3 that essentially lets you look at top 2 for either a Crystalia or Pixie and add it to your hand is already fine, but you evolve her for 2 and you bot deck an opponent's follower. That bot decking ability is really good. Like that is one of the removals that I think hits extra hard in Shadowverse Evolve because, you know, just destroying something is cool, but the destruction oftentimes, you know, if they have ways to recur things from the cemetery, it's going to come back. So being able to bot deck something, or like instead of like top decking something like what Rune does sometimes, is really, really good. So chances are they will not see that card again unless they have specific ways to search it out. And my final mention for these kind of must-haves for Forest, I think would be Rose Deer. So this is one of the Shadowverse Flame cards that has Rush and is a 4-cost 4/3. And it simply on fanfare puts a Thorn Burst into your EX area, which of course is the spell that the Rose Queen generates. So just having another burst potential off of that is pretty good. You know, it's a good stats, you know, 4/3 with Rush is always good to trade something off of your opponent's board while setting up for lethal in the future. So I'd say like Rose Deer you can pick up as a 3 of it since it's just a bronze. Now Sword is where things get pretty exciting, as we already talked about it in the past as well, where both legendaries are really good, the golds in the set are really good, like everything for Sword is really nice. There's quite a few must-haves. We're gonna start off with, you know, the forefront, the forerunner of the pack, which is of course Albert, one of the most famous sword cards or Shadowverse cards in general of all time. 3/5 Storm, and then you evolve it, and then it basically swings twice. It's really good. You apply Leonidas's resolve onto this, it's even better. So, you know, 12 damage to face with the resolve is pretty nice. So Albert's gonna be played for quite a long time. Albert's a really good source of storm damage. The sword does get more of these tools in the future too, but Albert's kind of your best bet for the longest time. Some decks like to play 3, some decks like to play 2, and then you play either like a 3-2 lineup or a 2-1 lineup. If you want to be safe, pick up 3 of the normal one, 2 of the evolved one. But if you want to, you know, just like kind of sort of have it in as that extra storm damage, then 2-1 is also fine. So I'll let you figure it out as you're deck building, but I think if you want to just be safe and know that you have the Alberts, then I think 3-2 is quite good in lineup wise. And of course, Alexander. Alexander is, you know, the big 5/9 rush that just keeps, you know, refreshing itself every time it deals combat damage. So you get to clear out your opponent's board very easily, and in a lot of decks you do play it as like 2 or 3, but 3 is pretty common just because it's like, well, I can for 6 cost answer your board while potentially also having a 5 attack follower still stay in that refresh state too. So I'd say 3, you're pretty safe picking up 3. There's Control Sword in the future that like even in set 6 still plays Alexander, so there's a really good card that lasts for a very long time. Speaking of cards that last for a long time though, Leonidas continues to be one of Sword's main win cons for a very long time, especially for the more long-term themed Sword decks like Control Sword. Leonidas again, it spawns that Leonidas is resolved after Last Words, and on top of that on evolve you get to ping damage to your opponent's board while trading him in to spawn that resolve. So 3 copies of the normal, 2 copies of the evo should be good. Sometimes you play 2-1 as well, but 3-2 should be safe. Really good card, just amazing. It's one of the big win cons for the deck too, and the class will continue to use it for a very long time as well, so definitely pick it up. And then finally, my personal Oshi, Emilia. She's great, she's cute, she's beautiful. She's just really nice, especially in the earlier sets, in order to kind of just like tempo out a really big board all of a sudden, right? You go second, play her on turn 4, and then you EP your Floral Fencer that you played off the Emilia. Boom, you have a huge board. Otherwise, you ping something as well on the opponent's board too. Amelia is good just to have as 3 of. I also really like her, so I think just owning 3 will make you a happier person. So that's just my personal advice, you know, for Amelia right there. Then the silvers are pretty interesting. For sword here, we do have Gino, 11 Vanguard, who is a 3-cost 3/3 with evolve for 1. And on evolve, he looks for 11 followers. Now, 11 followers are things like Udius, things like Albert, but if you've played the app version, you know, you have the knowledge that there are more 11 followers coming in the future, and there are only going to be more and more and more. So as a searcher, this isn't too bad, right? So you can't target like, you know, Gino himself, and you know, who knows, maybe when we get more 11 support, they'll make another 11 searcher too. But while right now Gino might not be super great, there's a huge future potential for this card. So just because it's a silver, I would kind of pick it up just to be safe. Count wise, I think 3 of the normal, 2 of the Evo should be fine. So, you know, just think about that as you go. But since we're talking about 11s, let's talk about Udius, of course. 2 cost 0/4, so 0 attack follower, but he does have the quick effect that you can, of course, engage him to select an enemy follower on the field and deal it a damage. There will be quite a bit of aggro running around in this format just because of Abyss having a really good and strong aggro deck in its arsenal. So Udius could be seen as like a tech card. It's kind of like an Angel Snipe, except Angel Snipe does 2 damage, but this is on a body, so you can keep reusing it. You know, you kind of play him down and then, you know, basically just pass turn. Your opponent plays something, swings to face, and you immediately just tap him and get rid of it immediately. You line up 2, you can start dealing a bit more damage as well. So again, it's kind of more of the controlling game plan, but I feel like it's an interesting card and it's a silver, so I'd say picking up 3 should be pretty easy. And then finally, Whole Soul Swing is a cool quick spell that a sword finally gets, which is a 2-cost quick spell. You choose an enemy follower in the field and deal 3 damage, and then you put a night token into your EX area. So it's a 2-cost that generates a 1/1 in a way. You still have to pay for the 1/1, but at the same time, it does clear some of your opponent's board too. Sword doesn't really have a lot of good quick spells, so this being one of them is quite nice. And again, it's a silver, so I'd say pick up like 3 copies should be quite easy. And then of course, Avant Blader is the big bronze card, I think, for sword in this set, where it's a 4/4/4 that evolves for 1, and then on evolve, you get to search your deck for 2 officers, right? So there's a lot of really good officers in the format in general. Swordsman, Quick Blader, you know, Floral Fencer, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of good targets you can get, and that kind of fuels into your Leonidas too, so it's overall pretty nice. I would say 3-2, but oftentimes you play like a 2-1 lineup, but again, it's a bronze, so it should be a bit easier to pick up. And finally, Gunner Maid Sedia. I've introduced this card before as a more aggro variant where you play more princess followers, so she looks for a princess follower from your deck, whether that's Aurelia or the Pompous Princess. You know, they're both valid targets, and we might be getting more princess cards in the future too. You know, who knows how they decide to distribute things, so she'll also be a searcher for that. So as a 1/3 2-cost, it's not too bad as well. So again, it's a bronze, 3 copies. Jumping dimensions to Runecraft this time, and of course, speaking of jumping dimensions, we have to talk about Daria for a second. Daria is interesting where like regular dimension shift was still better at the time, but at the same time, a lot of people were experimenting with Daria because she's a 6/5/5 that kind of like, she ditches your hand, but if you've been playing your hand out quite a lot, it's not as heavy, and you do have, you know, neutral spells that do stuff off being discarded, but she in exchange spams your EX area from your top deck, and then on top of that, you know, counts cards in your cemetery that are followers for your spell chains, and on evolve lets you play spells and followers for virtually free, right? Or cost 5 less, but you know, for the most part, that will be virtually free. So she kind of gives you this huge tempo swing that's a little bit luck reliant. And so while she doesn't really do as much now, but in future sets, she will be pretty good. And I've seen people like mess around with her in things like Earthright, for example, which is also pretty cool because she herself doesn't care about spell chain. You can just play her out and then like ditch your hand and then kind of go ham on it. And Earthright isn't as card draw heavy as spell chain, so like playing her in Earthright is pretty cool. So I would say like just for the current builds and for the future, I would pick up Daria as like 3 of the normal one, 2 of the evolved one. She's also just Daria. Like honestly, I just like having Daria in my collection just because she's that famous, like such a cool unit. You know, she does get a leader card in the future, so that will also be something to pick up potentially. But some of you that follow me on Twitter know that I actually use a Dimension Shift playmat for a lot of my tournaments, just because like I don't even play Rune that much, but I just really like Daria. Like she's cute, she's cool, you know, very, very like memorable piece of art from the Side Games universe. But Pascal is a card that I do recommend you pick up, especially if you're an Earthright player, you know, 4/3/5 that of course buffs your board and also takes out your opponent's followers potentially too. Is pretty good. So she's more of like a 3 of if you're playing Earthright. I think she will be very nice, and also just very nostalgic, very cute card too, so very nice. So for Rune Golds, there's something to talk about, which is of course the pair of academic followers that weren't messed around with as much in the Japanese version, but I would like to see the English community do put in a little bit of effort into, which is An and Greya, right? So An is, I mean, they're both academic followers, and An says that if Grea's on the board, she costs 2 less to play, and she evolves for 1, where she then searches your deck for an academic follower that isn't herself, right? Well, there will be future Ans potentially, because knowing the app version, I mean, there's a whole expansion in the app version dedicated to academic followers, but this will be a good, like, future-proofing card in case we do keep getting more academic cards where, you know, she can target for literally anything. But Gray, of course, costs 2 less to play as a 4-cost 5/4 that then can engage herself to deal an enemy follower either 3 damage or, if Anna's on the board, 6 damage, which will take out basically everything. So when you think about the fact that each of them costs 2 less to play when the other one is on the board, they basically become, you know, 2 cost 4/5, 2 cost 5/4, one of them is a searcher, one of them deals damage. So just for that, I think it might be good to pick up 3 of each, and then I guess like for An's Evolve version 2, again, this is more of like a future proofing. I'm not really too sure like how much it'll be used, so if this isn't a priority for you and you really need to just get the cards for your decks, then you can ignore this, but just for future proofing, I think it's kind of interesting. And then we have Rhyme Wind, which is the bounce unevolved follower spell, back to hand / back to top deck, depending on what your spell chain count is at. Rhyme Wind is like a 2 or 3 of, I think, because this card is going to be good in spell chain for a long time, and even in set 6 it'll see some use as well, but more of like as a one of. So I think picking up like 2 copies is pretty safe. If you want to be really safe, you can pick up 3, but I think honestly you're quite fine with 2 because it does bounce back to hand, it lets them reuse fanfares and stuff, so it is a little bit tricky in that sense to use, and it doesn't bounce evolve followers either, so it's a little bit restrictive there too, but it's still a very good spell nevertheless. For the silvers, we have Remi Rami, so this is the witchy duo. 3-cost 3/3 that on evolve, of course, lets you get a strike form golem out, and on Earthrise gives it +2 attack, so the 3/2 with rush becomes a 5/2 with rush, which can kind of take out most of your opponent's followers. So in terms of just how many stats you get from this 3/4 cost, it's pretty good. I mean, it summons the strike form golem, right? You don't have to rush it in immediately, you can just keep it standing as a, you know, 5/2, so no need to engage it early, right? So Remi Rami is like a 3/2 of to pick up. And then there's quite a few bronzes that you want to pick up for Rune as well. So starting off with Craig, of course, we talked about him before. I would say 3/3 count is good. He's basically like a penguin wizard, but, you know, just another way to achieve the same thing. So seeing him in the early days of Spellchain would be very good. I also introduced a Merlin-less list of Spellchain where he's very important too. So 3/3 I think should be pretty good. Witch Bolt, usually played as like a 1 or a 2 of, you know, it's just a good damage spell that draws you cards too, but again, pretty easy to pick up, so it's a bronze, I'd say 3 just in case. Magical Strategy, of course, Chess will be a deck introduced in the next set, in set 3, so I guess that's the set after Uma Musume, but Magical Strategy will be good. It summons those magical pawns and you're gonna be needing them in the future, so I would pick up 3 of this too. And finally, Red Hot Ritual is an important Earthrise card as well. They sometimes see play here and there, but again, it's a bronze. I would say pick up 3 just to be safe for the future. Getting into the second half, we get on to Dragon, which of course has quite a few good cards in this set as well as the birth of a brand new playstyle as well. You might have noticed I have quite a thing for saying the word as well in my videos. I think first thing we gotta mention is Dragon Song Flute. It is a card that of course kind of enables or is a big tool of the discard dragon playstyle that kind of picks up a lot in this expansion, and it's just kind of a must-have card in order to be able to play that deck because it summons your Hellflame Dragons, it helps you draw cards, it kind of makes sure you're discarding cards every turn to proc your other effects that require you to discard a card every turn, so just for that it's pretty good. So if you plan to play Discard Dragon instead of Ramp Dragon or any other dragon archetypes in the future, definitely pick up 3 flutes. Of course, the other legendary Imperial Dragoon is an extra bonus card for Discard Dragon 2 that kind of helps you to keep pinging damage and drawing cards as well, which kind of what this archetype wants to do. That being said, because it's such a heavy cost, a lot of people tend to play like a 1/1 lineup or a 2/1 lineup, but if you want to be safe, you can pick up 3/2 in terms of the counts between the pre-Evo and the Evo version. But I think if you're still kind of experimenting with your list, you can kind of hold off a little bit, or like pick up a 2/1 lineup and then pick up the remaining pieces over time as well. Looking at the golds, Neptune is interesting. She was played for a little bit. I feel like she will see some play going forward as well, just because she summons your Mega Lorcas, which are like 2/2 tokens that, you know, you kind of put out pretty easily and they get rushed too, so it's a bit easier for her to fight the board for Dragon. And if you do go all the way to the Evo, then you essentially get to, you know, you have a 5/5 for effectively 7 cost, but then you also summon 2 2/2s that have Storm, so it can help you kind of make that last bit of damage as well. So I'd say pick up a 3-2 lineup just in case she doesn't see as much play. So if you really don't, you know, if you already have a list in mind, that you can kind of skip this part. But I remember in set 2, she didn't hurt to have an experiment with as well. And finally, Dragonic Fervor, I think is a pretty interesting card. It is a spell that helps you ramp, but does cost 5, so it helps you, you know, get that extra play point, give your extra defense to your leader, and draw a card. So it kind of does very similar things to Olivia, except it helps you ramp, which is pretty good for Ramp Dragon. I did play this card a little bit in set 2 as well, so I'd say picking up like 2 copies is fine. You don't really want to be playing it as a 3 of, because it doesn't actually put anything on your board, but I think like 2 copies is pretty good for Fervor. For silvers, we talked about this already in the Dex version of this video, where we talked about Siegfried a little bit. Siegfried's pretty cool just in being able to kind of clear off stuff of your opponent's board, and of course, you know, he has a pretty cheap cost to evolve into as well. His stats don't increase on Evo though, so that's like the only kind of like tidbit to take note of. But he's a silver, so I'd say maybe pick up 3-2 in copies. But then the silver that you really want to have is Dracomancer's Rites. Like, Rites is basically the engine of the deck that helps you to keep pinging damage, and it's always like that last 2 bits of damage that really helps. You know, your Forte goes in for 7, you get that extra last 2 that if your opponent's at 9 life, and that really does help a lot in cleaning up games. So Dracomancer's Rites, if you're planning to play Discard Dragon, is a must-have 3 of. Like, this is a super important card for this archetype, so definitely pick it up. For bronzes, it's pretty simple. Mushisu is actually a very cool card that was played in a interesting archetype for Dragon, which was called Aggro Dragon, where you basically played as many aggressive pieces and like these low-cost, strong followers that you could. And Mushisu, every time your follower evolves, gets +2 attack. So you effectively can have like a 4/6 attack Mushisu just like sitting on the board. Of course, it doesn't have aura or anything, so it can get taken out by opponent's spells, but if you play it on curve, especially going first, it can be pretty strong. So I would pick up Mushisu as a 3F just to kind of have it, because it is a pretty strong card in that sense. And the other card, of course, is Dragon Tamer. You want to have 3-2 in terms of the pre-Evo to Evo lineup here, because it is pretty good in some Discard Dragon variants. So if you're playing Discard, I would pick it up just in case, and give yourself some extra oomph and some extra discard fodder as well. And now we are at Abysscraft, and Abyss of course got a pretty big boost in this set. There's quite a lot of different variants for Abyss as well, so I'm expecting to do very well in the tournaments in this format. Before we look at the actual face of the class in this set, I want to talk about Soul Dealer for a second. Soul Dealer is really good in being able to deal yourself damage, which of course you need for a lot of the kind of traits in the Abysscraft class. But it's a 6/5/4 cost ward that also evolves, and on evolve lets you basically destroy something and heal back a lot of that damage too. So you end up with like a 7/6 ward that's just sitting there menacingly while taking out your opponent's stuff. He's played in virtually every variant and also continues to be played in Abyss for a very long time. So I think if you have any interest in playing Abyss in the future or right now, I would pick up 3 of the normal, 2 of the Evo, because you're going to be seeing him quite a lot. Vanya, on the other hand, you might have noticed we weren't playing her as much in the lists right now, but if you've been keeping up with some of the card reveals from the future sets, there is going to be more vampire support in the future, and Vanya is already like pretty good into like some of these like pseudo aggro mid-rangey decks as well. So I think Vanya has a lot of potential in the future, and I think that overall is going to be a good deck going forward, because she's an archetype that gets support quite a bit. She's kind of like Medusa, where she just keeps getting new forms and keeps coming up in future sets as well. So I would definitely pick up the 3 Vanyas as well, just as like a future proofing, and like her related cards too that we'll talk about in this part too. So this kind of means like Vampiric Fortress, for example, right? That's also Vanya support, that like if you're already picking up Vanya, then you might as well pick up 3 Vampiric Fortress as well, just because they kind of coincide together in the same package. For other gold, Kawi is a very good one. I mean, this card was very nice, and just being able to again like work in these control Abyss variants that I think that we've seen quite a bit in tournaments in Japan. So Kawi, if you're playing control, is definitely a must-have 3 of. And Azazel, I think, is another card you should pick up, just because it has like very strong effects. Being able to kind of lower your opponent's defense, you know, down to 10 is also huge. And of course, we're gonna keep getting in like random discard effects in Abyss, and that's gonna become kind of like one of its main playstyles in the future. So Azazel just fits into that perfectly. So 3-2 lineup of Azazel I think is a good pickup as well. Into the silvers, once again, Vanya related cards. Precious Bloodfangs, I mean, it's just another good card that again, if you're picking up Vanya, you want to basically just pick up 3 of the Precious Bloodfangs too. Date, well, it is also a related card to Vanya. It is also just an amazing card in aggro and basically every variant of Abyss, being able to make forest bats and then on evolve make more of them as well for a very low cost. Like, it's a 2 cost that evolves for 1 is really good, and on strike making forest bats is always going to be nice, especially on an evolved body. So for that reason, definitely pick up 3-2 lineup of Abate. And Trick Dullahan sees some play as well in the more aggro variant, so let's say again, it's a silver, pick up 3 copies just because it helps you make those ghosts, and being able to continue have that aggressive output and pressure is really important in this deck. So picking up cards like that is going to be very big, and when we look at future sets that contain Abysscraft support, we're going to keep looking out for that as well. The bronzes are pretty full for Abysscraft in this set too. I feel like we have a lot of cards to highlight here. here. Soul Mini Devil is kind of like Mushisu, where like something evolves and you do something. So this time you evolve something and it deals your damage to your enemy's leader, which is pretty good. So if you get 2 Soul Mini Devils lined up and you evolve, you get to ping 4 to your opponent's face, which is pretty huge in my opinion. So just for that, it's like a must-have 3 of, and it's a bronze, so it's pretty easy to pick up. And I think overall, like Aggro Abyss is pretty budget friendly, I would say, just because a lot of the good cards are like pretty easy to get. Demonic Hedonist is another one you can pick up as like a 3/2. Helps you draw cards and like kind of filter through your deck so you don't run out of gas, especially, which is very, very important. And sometimes like you just have stuff clogging up your hand that you don't really need, so she kind of lets you trade them off. Bone Chimera is a card that I haven't featured too much in the lists, but it's a 3-cost 1/1, so you might be thinking, oh, stats wise, why would I want to pay 3 costs for that? But for Necrocharge 7, you get to give it Russian Bane, which means that it can kind of trade off anything on the board that is just kind of like lingering there. But on Fanfare, it mills you 3. Milling is really good because it helps you achieve your Necrocharge costs, and so for that reason, a 3-cost that mills you 3 is actually quite good in this current card pool, so I think for that reason it's good to pick up 3 of this as well. And my final kind of honorable shout out, I guess, is to Necro Carnival. I think this card will see some play. It wasn't necessarily like a must have, but it's a bronze that I think has some cool applications. So you either get to revive a 2-cost follower, or you get to summon 2 ghost tokens, right, for a 3-cost, which you might be thinking is like, one of those 2 isn't too great, but Necrocharge 10 you can do both. So for 3 costs, getting out something like a Vate or a Vanya, like things like that, just immediately on back onto your board. And also in the future, the more good 2-cost followers there are, the better this card will get. While at the same time summoning 2 ghosts, meaning you have 2 more face damage on top of that, is pretty good in my opinion, right? So I'd say like pick up 3 Necro Carnivals is just like a nice little future-proof card that I feel like it doesn't hurt to have. And finally, Haven. Of course, Haven is a very big winner in this set too, because of course of Heavenly Aegis, which is the legendary in this set that I'm going to tell you. If you want to play Haven going forward, you're going to want to have this guy. Heavenly Aegis is indestructible, big, huge. You can give it ward and it just kind of stares at your opponent. I've described this guy all kinds of ways in previous videos, but this card is still used to this very day in the Japanese format because of how strong it is. And so if you want to play Control Haven in any kind of way, you're going to need Aegis. I would say pick up 3 of the normals, 2 of the Evos, and you'll be set for at least the next year or so. Like, this is a very good card to have, and you definitely want to have it in your arsenal as a Haven player. Infatuated Seraph is a bit more of a harder one to describe in terms of how many copies you should have, because a lot of lists these days just play like 1 copy, 2 copies, or something like that. So I think picking up 2 is probably fine. It is an amulet that essentially kind of, spells the beginning of the end for your opponent, and that kind of puts them on a timer of like, okay, play fast, otherwise Aegis is coming. And it's also because it searches for virtually anything. In the future, if we have other insane cards like Aegis for Haven, then of course a Seraph will only get better. But I don't really see myself playing it as a 3 of, because you don't really want to see it that much per game, and you do have ways to search out your amulet, so even playing 1 is fine. And Shadowverse Evolve isn't the kind of game where you just kind of like lose your pieces along the way, there's no way for them to go to any other zones randomly, or like, unless we sometimes see like a mill deck in the future, which we will for Sword, then you could see yourself playing more copies of these cards just to not lose your one and only copy, going to your cemetery. But I think 2 copies of Seraph is fine. Then we have Kaguya, one of the gold that is also pretty good in the control variants. I think overall, if you are playing Kaguya, you want to be playing 3 copies in the main deck and then 2 in the Evolve deck. She's just very nice and kind of giving you a bit of that board control, and also just letting you fight the mid game until you get to your late game win con. So for that reason, I do think she's quite good to pick up. And finally, Elana's Prayer. This is a card that, of course, Elana is pretty notorious in the app version. Her prayer itself, is stronger when she's the one that brings her out instead of having to play the amulet hard from hand. But in the future, if we do have ways to kind of like cheat out amulets from deck for a cheap cost and then suddenly start healing up and building up a big board, Elana's Prayer will be very good. So I think just for future proofing, I would pick up 3. And I mean, sometimes, I see this very often in Japan where people have those like phone cases that are clear in the back, and they'll just put like a card that like serves a lot of memories for them in the past. Elana's Prayer is a good one just to kind of like have like that, to let everybody know that you are a Heal Haven player, and you're just waiting for that right moment to come and shine together with this kind of playstyle. For Silvers, Radiance Angel is a pretty good one just because it gives you that heal, sustain, card draw, and all that kind of stuff. To Silver, I would say pick up 3 copies of the pre-Evo and 2 copies of the post-Evo version. And Beaskull Aria is another card that if you want to play a bit more of that amulet heavy Haven, then I think you're definitely going to be seeing it in play too. It makes you Holy Falcons and Holy Tigers, and I think, both cards are pretty good in being able to clear boards and clear your opponent's life and stuff like that. I think Beaskull Aria is a pretty good pickup too. I would say pick pick up 3 copies. It is a silver, so it's pretty easy to get. And for the bronzes, I'm going to choose to give a shout out to Frog Cleric, which is a 2-cost 2/2 bronze that on Fanfare restores 2 defense to your leader, but you can also pay 2 in order to restore another one. So it's kind of this like on-demand healing. So especially if you want to play like Alana's Prayer, then you're going to be able to build up a board pretty easily with this, or rather pump up your board is the correct way to put it. And just in general, like 2-cost Fanfare heal 2 is pretty good. It's kind of like Unico, but in a Fanfare instead of being on strike. So I'd say pick up 3 copies of Frog Cleric just to kind of have it. And that is it. Those are all the must-have cards for set 2. So I hope that this has helped you, kind of look out for what cards you want to be pulling and keeping track of as you open your packs. Make sure to support your locals and pick up product and, pick up these cards at your locals as much as possible. Of course, there is a list of shops that support Shadowverse Evolve on the official website, so you can check that out in the description below. And also take a look at this full set list to really go through all the cards. There are quite a few that I didn't mention as well that we might be bringing up in the future too. So if you just want to look through the card list and see maybe there's some other more niche cards I didn't mention that might be better for certain playstyles, then you want to find those too. All the links in the description as always. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, please do give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. But with that, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.